Now, the first question I have is whether or not the background is mirrored on your screen or not.
The background is like it's not widescreen. I don't know how that looks to them. Oh, there it is.
And we are live, Jeff.
Hey guys, welcome to Your Bytes Your Rights, a live weekly discussion and podcast about data ownership, digital rights, and your privacy. In this episode, we address credit bureaus and the Fair Credit Reporting Act. I'm Jeff Jokish, founder of Privacy Plan and a global privacy researcher. I'm here with my co-host, Christian Kmeyer, managing partner at Sustany Capital, a VC fund that focuses on blockchain tech. Chris has a big interest in privacy identity, the future of money. He's also done some stellar work on understanding the problems of central bank digital currencies. Say hello to the audience, Chris.
Hey, it only took 24 episodes for you to get my name right. That's awesome. Yeah, so I taught privacy law right after law school, and when I first moved here 22 years ago, I was shocked that things like Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion can exist, because where I'm from, these will be criminal organizations. So I've been always interested in taking those guys down, so let's discuss how we do that.
Well, yeah, it is interesting. I do a lot of work sort of researching data brokers, and credit bureaus are sort of like the sort of first legally defined data brokers in our sort of system. And they've sort of been given provenance to collect data about people. So let's talk a little bit about that. Today, we've got a couple people with us. We've got Dana Rivkin, the principal cloud architect, and also known as the Lady Justice for the People. Hey, how you doing, Dana?
Hey, Jeff. I'm well. How are you doing?
Good. And then we've got Ruben. And Ruben, I'm not sure exactly what your qualifications are, your titles. You want to introduce yourself?
Oh, sure. And disclaimer / for words of doubt, I'm currently in a vehicle. I shall be arriving at the destination shortly, where I can have a little less jiggles and background noise. Short version, many moons ago, I built a legal technology company. It was called Class Action Incorporated. We used to help people file claims for class actions they were a part of, but weren't aware they were a part of. We processed about 20 million in claims for about 100,000 folks. And we broke several world records for class action stuff. One of them was for filing claims. One of them was for filing opt-outs. And one of them was for filing objections. And the latter two categories related to the Equifax data breach case, which we tripled the world record for class action opt-outs and objections for that case, which Equifax was not entirely enthusiastic about, and even went so far as to send us a note to the DNS registries asking that the No Thanks Equifax website be taken down for confusion of the brand, naturally. So it was a bit of a saga, but sort of knee deep in data privacy stuff, CBPA and GDPR rather, and some of the technologies which might be employed for not just sort of governmental pressure, but also non-governmental private pressure to help sort of streamline a balancing of the equities as opposed to the value of individual privacy whilst retaining the value of aggregate transparency.
That's awesome. I think you're going to fit perfect here. And in fact, we want to walk through a little bit of the timeline of the Equifax breach that I think probably a lot of people never knew. And if they did know, they probably forgot sort of what happened with that sort of very important breach for the American public. So we'll get to that a little bit shortly. I want to maybe start though first with a news item that just popped up in the last couple of days, another problem for Equifax, and that is a news item that Equifax has been sending out or did send out a bunch of wrong credit scores for people. And there's actually now another lawsuit for them. I don't know if you're involved with that one, Ruben, but they've actually were slapped with a lawsuit over incorrect credit scores this spring for millions of customers. And do you have a comment on that lawsuit? I'm sure you're aware of that one.
It popped up on the radar. The one thing I've learned about hanging out with attorneys is to reserve my own opinions until I'm an attorney. So yeah, I guess my instinct would be to ask questions around whether or not there was a right for an expectation of accuracy, and whether or not there are any sort of perceived damages, and if so, how might those be measured? Is those sort of statutory damages, or are they sort of injury for the purpose of class action? Is there sufficient numerosity, which is more than 50 people? Sounds like there is. And is there a common question of law, which also sounds like, well, presumably. And then, is the injury representative, right? So is the injuries that an individual suffers representative of the scope and nature of the industries that others might have suffered? To the extent that there is divergence or variation in that, would determine its strength for the purposes of class certification. A lot of these kinds of things are sort of shoved towards the arbitration courts. So I guess my first question would be if it survives dismissal, as to whether or not it's going to survive class cert.
Right. So for our viewers, our listeners, I guess I should sort of summarize it a bit here. So the Wall Street Journal is sort of reporting that Equifax sent out credit scores for millions of customers applying for home and auto loans, and that a coding error at the company affected consumer scores by as much as 20 points in either direction. But that was enough for some prospective borrowers to be rejected for those loans. So potentially, there is actually harm to some of these customers that they didn't get a loan. Now, I don't know exactly how you might quantify that harm, right? But in this particular case, it's not necessarily just a, hey, I've got an inaccuracy on my credit report. This actually may have actually caused people to not get a loan. So it would potentially affect whether a case could get standing, I would think, in a particular lawsuit. And maybe we'll dive into the whole standing issue. Should we do that now? Or
let me inject a call to action from your friendly neighborhood VC, as in those are the calls to action that I always make when I hear things like that. There should be a website that provides you with an option to actually assess your damages, right? It doesn't seem too hard, and Ruben can chime in on that, but in my mind, if someone got a, let's say, car loan, and that I think that was the impetus for the class action lawsuit in this particular case, because the credit score of that particular lead complaint person deviated by 150 points, so that was rather extreme. But even my contention would be, even if it just deviated by whatever 20-30 points, and that was material to the interest rate that this person was being charged and or even denied, that is your damage, right? So the difference between what you should have been paying based on a different score and what you are actually paying based on the score that this credit agent sent this particular vendor. And so it would be a good community service, and there's probably also a business model on top to be had there, to just simply create a website where you can throw in these numbers. So your credit score you were giving, your alternative credit score, and it spits out kind of an average APR that should be close enough.
Yeah, that is an interesting that's an interesting idea, Chris. It could potentially give you an average for what your harm might have been. one of the problems we have with class action lawsuits, right, is that the damages have to be concrete and particularized based upon some Supreme Court rulings like Spokio, where the Supreme Court essentially said that if you want to get standing in a federal court, you've got to have, some particular things going on in your lawsuit. And Ruben can probably elucidate these things much better than I, but even if I was to be able to say that I had, my interest rate was 6% instead of 4%, can that really be generalized to the entire population of people that were seeking damages, right? I think that might be hard to do.
Yeah, so the question is like, with what degree of confidence might one sort of get an Exhibit A for an individual? Is that a representative class member for a much broader class, right? Generally speaking, within a class action context, you'll have a representative plaintiff, anywhere up to 4 or 5, and they'll sort of be the key witness, if you will. The role of that individual is sort of to have representative claims, presumably with documentation, Exhibit A, and it's not quite a thankless role. People will sort of take between 5 and 25K for 3 or 4 years of nonsense, but that individual might be representing anywhere up to 300 million people in some cases, right? So it can be challenging, I think, to get something that's representative. What you might do is get a sort of reliable range and an agreement and a settlement agreement among sort of both parties as to what they believe the variability between class members might be, and as to what kinds of data might be drawn for the purposes of veracity, of determining, like, this Dave versus Mary in this particular class action. Now we'll be using that to measure sort of purchases over X period of time, moderated by Y score differential as revealed in Z purchase categories at W volume, right? Probably a bit complex for most folks, but if there's a way to sort of get representative data, at a large enough scope to be able to sort of model that across the rest of the class, that presumably could be a rubric for class counsel to make a case to the court saying, hey, look, here's the scope, here's the variance, here are the kinds of data that we can pull. These forms of data are hard enough to get that to ask plaintiffs to get it would be deemed unduly burdensome for the purposes of exercising their individual rights, whereas these other things are less burdensome, right? So by way of example, there was a case for, I think it was a milk, I'll pick a better one. So lithium battery antitrust case, right? Anybody who purchased something with a battery in it between the years 2000 and 2011, aka 90% of the population, there was a price fixing case with the lithium ion batteries. So the class was literally just said, look, tell us how many things, and we'll take the device number multiplied by whatever the sort of per device claim looks like, and that'll be your receivables, right? The bigger question here that I would be asking is, what is the delta between any fair, equitable, and reasonable versus the certified liability damp on the class basis? Because some of those differentials can be pretty serious, right? To the rest of my understanding, there's between 8 and 28 billion class action settlements across 400 to 600 litigation events per year. The certified liability for that volume on an annual basis is closer to $2 trillion a year. So if corporate America is taking a $2 trillion ice cream and saying sorry by giving you a $28 billion ice cream, I mean, that sort of offers the path for calculated corporate non-compliance, doesn't it?
Right.
So Yeah.
So that's interesting. I can see the point. So maybe there is a play there for an interesting damage claim. Let's try to broaden this discussion a little bit. There's actually a question from the audience about FCRA, more generalized. Were the weaknesses of FCRA designed from the beginning to carve out exceptions for industry participants, or are the weaknesses of FCRA a result of the natural evolution of technology change? So that's a really sort of insightful question. And I think we need to maybe back up a little bit and talk a little bit about what actually is FCRA in order to sort of understand that. So maybe a quick summary for the audience, right? So FCRA really regulates credit bureaus or credit reporting agencies. It's one of the oldest US federal privacy laws. Maybe you could really call it maybe the first national privacy law. It really has sort of four prongs the way I sort of think about it, right? Accuracy, it mandates accurate and relevant data collection. It gives consumers access to their correct information. It has sort of a clause about permissible purposes and limits the use of consumer reports for those permissible purposes, such as employment and extension of credit or insurance. And it covers background checks, regulates the use of those consumer reports obtained from credit reporting agencies in reference to checking and background checks of employees. Now, it has a whole lot more things that it does. So those are only sort of the four maybe major ones that I sort of think about it. And the reason this law exists is because there were a lot of concerns of inadequate safeguards that existed to protect consumers and their interactions with these credit reporting agencies. Back in the 1960s, there were a lot of controversy about how credit reporting agencies were acting. Their reports were often used to just outright deny services and opportunities to people. And people had no rights to even see their reports. And by the late 60s, there were so much abuse in the industry, including requirements from these investigators that the agencies used to fill quotas about negative information on data subjects, that some investigators were even fabricating negative information so that they could meet their quotas. So it was really, really pretty bad. Additionally, these investigators were also collecting lifestyle information on subjects, including their sexual orientation, their marital status, their drinking habits, their cleanliness. It was pretty bad. So CRAs were also maintaining outdated information, providing files to law enforcement and unauthorized people. So public exposure to these industry practices led congressional inquiries and eventually the FCRA law. So that's sort of where we are. The real problem, though, with FCRA is this, right? It's the scope. So the scope of FCRA really only applies to what are called credit reporting agencies and organizations that furnish a, quote, consumer report. Many uses of financial information, however, fall outside of that jurisdictional scope, and there have been a lot of lawsuits about what exactly is a consumer reporting agency or a consumer report. Most data brokers claim to not be covered by FCRA, but their consumer reporting profiles look increasingly like a consumer report to us. So, I mean, why is the 10,000 data point consumer file, the profile that Axiom has on me, right? Why is that not a credit report? I mean, it has more information than a credit report would have on me that TransUnion has, probably, right? So that's really the problem, that the credit report, the FCRA doesn't actually cover organizations that you and I would probably say on any intelligent day, right, it is a credit report. Any comments on that, Dana, maybe? Chris?
Many, but let's have Dana go first.
I'd actually like to hear from you, Chris. This is not my wheelhouse of expertise as much as yours, so please take the wheel.
Well, I find it largely very problematic that the credit reports that you are getting when you ask for your own credit reports don't actually match what these companies sell out to vendors, apparently. So when vendors ask about it, they get something that's way more comprehensive, and you should get at least that and probably more. Right? And also kind of a historical record as far as I'm concerned, because you're really just getting a snapshot and an overall inaccurate snapshot that other companies that are paying for the service, which is also bizarre in my opinion, that someone can sell my data to begin with as a starting point. But if someone is selling my data, then I need to have at least complete copies, even without asking. Right? I should get like an alert on my cell phone. Someone just send out a credit report to this particular company, and that's what we send them. And ideally, obviously, before, so that you can check. It's like, okay, you are including all these other information. Like in my personal case, it was years that they conflated my name with another name. There was like another middle name that I've never heard of. And I'm honestly unclear what it did, because I didn't bother investigating it. It wasn't really worth my time outside of like sending in. It's like, hey, I don't know what you guys are doing, but you're conflating my name with someone else's name. And whatever this person is doing hopefully doesn't reflect on my credit score. Because in that case, I'm going to come after you.
Technically, Chris, if something happens negatively to you, if an adverse action happens, right? If somebody denies you a loan or something, you should be informed of that. That organization that takes an adverse action on you based upon that credit report, that information, has to notify you of that. If they don't give you a job, if they don't give you a loan, if they give you a higher interest rate, any of those things, they have to notify you based upon that action.
Or even the higher interest rate, they have to inform you?
I think so. I don't know. I have to check that one. I may be wrong about that, but I thought that was the case.
But they don't send you what they sent the
I would think if it jumps you into a higher bucket, they might have to notify you of that, but maybe I'm wrong.
Okay, maybe someone in the audience knows the exact answer to that question. Just raise your hand and we'll move you to the stage in that case.
Well, we lost Ruben at least for a second there.
Yeah.
Sorry, I interrupted you. Did you want to say something there?
Well, now I was just going to mention, thinking back to the earlier days when the internet was starting out, and you had the, get your free credit report websites coming up, and the brokers. And I remember one of the companies putting in my information, my social security number and all of that, and they, I was not the right person, apparently, because somebody else had typoed their social security number wrong when they, went to the website and put their information in. And now talking to them and trying to correct this, they can't change it because they made the social security number the primary key on the table. So this, there's, as far as our data cleanliness and, if that's even a word, but it's just not there. My data, I know, is a wreck in all sorts of places, and it's being moved around and juggled. And, every once in a while you get an email that somebody was trying to use your email address, right? And, was it typoed by mistake? Or was it because you were hacked? We were having this discussion before, Christian, but this is why I feel like that information of mine, all of my information, everything I do should be like I'm on my own PC and everything is being stored on my own PC. Back in the old days when we just had the peer-to-peer networking and everybody had all their information, on their own machine. Why wouldn't we have that with our cloud and have a containerized environment, even a whole virtual environment that you can audit all of your access and insights into everything, from your key access to your data access, and different standardized schemas to do that. So
let's get back to the personal data store in a minute, if we can, Dana. We got a couple comments from the audience that I think are relevant here. Kim Curry says, a consumer reporting agency is not allowed to procure your data without your knowledge or written permission. All end users that take an adverse action based in whole or in part must provide notification. For employment, they have a two-part process. So I guess that's a pretty good answer there. And Kimberly C says, when they offer you a higher insurance rate, like for life insurance or car insurance, that's bad. They need to tell you why and which data supplier. So I think I was right on that. Kimberly also says, I spend many hours in a month just fixing inaccurate info on someone's data file, credit file, LexisNexis, employment record, health record. HIPAA violations abound everywhere. So I guess they're sort of backing me up on that, right? That they're, that yes, if you have an adverse action, it has to be reported to you. And to Dana's point, that there's a lot of inaccuracies out there. There was a 2013 FTC report on how inaccurate how inaccurate credit reporting information is, and that it impacts, I think, something like 20% of everyone's people's credit scores. It didn't seem to be quite as bad as it might have been when I was looking at the stuff, but of course this was 10 years ago, and I don't know how far they actually dug, but I think it was like roughly 20% of people that they checked on. I think they only checked like 1,000 consumers, but of those, roughly 21% had a relatively big inaccuracy on their credit report.
Yeah, and again, that's only just a snapshot, right? Presumably. They probably just looked at one particular point in time, so you don't really know if over the last decade you were basically spending more on something because of a report that were issued to whoever lender you approached for your home loan, for your car loan, or for some other commercial purpose.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about something in particular, because Kimberly talked about medical and HIPAA stuff, right? So I've got a particular thing that I think is sort of relevant here. I've had a couple of sort of instances where I've got a couple of dings on my credit report because of medical debt, and it's not because I can't pay my medical debt. It's actually like minor. It's like a couple $100. But the reason it's there is because a couple of my doctors have sort of weird billing practices, and insurance providers pay things strangely. So I have one doctor that apparently sends some stuff out to a lab, and then the lab bills separately, and I thought the insurance provider was going to cover it, and so I didn't pay it, and then apparently they billed me and I didn't get the bill, and now I've got a ding on my credit. And another one that was sort of similar to that. So that stuff is really stupid, right? But it's partially because of the complication of all this medical billing crap and how insurance providers work and how medical organizations bill. And it's getting more and more complicated. And apparently it's up on the consumer to try to figure that shit out and call up the medical billing organizations and try to figure out, do I actually owe this? When do I have to pay it? Is the insurance company not going to pick it up? Why didn't the doctor just bill me at the office when I could have paid it right at his window? Or, and I would have paid it if I thought that I actually had to pay it. So it's just a pain in the ass, right? And this is actually affecting people's credit score. There's actually $88 billion in medical debt, right, that people owe. Now, it's probably not, from those small little things like that. A lot of it is, much larger chunks, right? But it is affecting people's credit scores. And in fact, it's such a big problem that just this July 1st, the rules on how the credit bureaus are calculating your credit scores have changed. there's three major changes that are happening, right? Paid off medical debt that was in collection is no longer included on your consumer credit scores as of July 1st, right? So it used to be that stuff just stayed on your credit score forever, even if you paid it off. Well, maybe not forever, but for a long time, right? Secondly, right, you now have more time before unpaid medical debt, so if you have something that's sort of sitting there and you haven't paid it yet, right, because you're trying to figure out if your insurance company is going to pay it, that unpaid medical debt doesn't get reported in your credit report until 6 months, right? So you have a little bit of time to figure it out before it actually gets dings on your credit report. And finally, starting in 2023, not this July, but next year, 2023, the top three credit bureaus, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion, will no longer ding you for credit for medical debt if it's below $500. So if somebody's sending you to a collection agent for $50, that no longer is going to fly. So that won't show up on your credit report at least. So those are pretty big changes to how things are happening, and it's going to help a lot of people have a higher credit score. The bigger point I think here is that, I don't think a lot of people even understand how credit scores get calculated. Even if they do, how does this really impact my ability and propensity to pay, right? I pay all my bills, right? But this is actually changing my score. I don't know, probably not dramatically, but changing it a bit, right? Why are we calculating people's ability or propensity to pay based upon some arcane formula? Is that really the right way to do
it? Dina's just shaking her head. No, it's utterly absurd that we allow this to happen, that we kind of rate people on that particular level, right? So in the course of our business, we look at a lot of alternative system. Obviously, this whole credit rating system that we are talking about is very specific to the United States. It doesn't exist in Europe in this particular way, but then also the obvious thing here is there's a lot of people that could never establish a credit record because they don't have government-issued credentials, for example. That's a large portion of the population, more than 1 billion people. And so the larger point there being is we're super interested in seeing new ways of doing that. And we were just discussing this yesterday. So we were looking at one particular implementation where this app was tracking very simple behavior, i.e. how reliable are you by the fact that you're basically going to the same geolocation every day pretty much at the exact same time, i.e. I'm going to work at 9 a.m. and then I'm returning at 6 p.m. and you're super accurate about that. You can tell a lot from that simple geolocation data without needing to know anything else, right? So the problem is always the same. Should people create these kind of immense profiles and then deduce other functions of this person from just knowing all his or her data? Because there's so many things that people are subject to that they have no influence over, right? Like you got a close relative and you take over, like you said, their medical debt for whatever person, it's purpose, it's your mom, it's your son, it's your daughter. And you create a liability there to obviously no fault of your own. I mean, that doesn't speak to anything else than that you got into an unfortunate circumstance, and that's it, right? So to me, this entire system is utterly inhumane and needs to be abandoned. But in the meantime, I think what we need to do is just be practical about that and go after the most egregious violations, like this lawyer is been doing, it seems like. So I actually emailed him shortly before the show in case he can make it. It doesn't look like it. But the larger point there being, though, is, and we see that a lot, is just offer an alternative that's better, that's more useful for the people that actually want to provide credit to these consumers. And not do the opposite. I mean, what we're seeing now is more of these pay later schemes. And they are just designed basically to turn whatever company you are into a financial service provider and no longer focus on providing goods and services per se. Famously, that was the case with GE, and it looks like Apple is going that particular route. And yeah, I find this very troublesome. We shouldn't be looking at humans from a perspective of a credit score based on some artificial algorithm that then follows you around and oftentimes without you knowing it. That's very depressing in my mind. But so yeah, call to action to all startups out there who want to go after these data brokers. We'll have your back. Pitch us. Let us know what you're doing against these people, how you're creating data in a different way, creating data that doesn't belong in databases.
You know, Chris, we had a couple good comments from the audience here. I don't know whether Kim Curry or Kimberly C have any interest in popping up here into the panel, but you're welcome if you want to raise your hand. We can pull you up. I also wanted to. I don't know if we can play it, Chris, but there's a clip, a couple minutes that we might want to play from that video. If I can find it here.
Yeah. I'll have it here somewhere. You said pull into 5 minutes. Can you hear my audio?
This recording is from FinTech Nexus USA, formerly
all really look like Blends Tech Blends company, right? To be able to help our customers, our lending partners, reach these communities, deliver their services in a way that's way simpler, way more accessible, right? And ultimately gets to more equitable outcomes, right, for these populations. So I'm excited to dive into this conversation today. But Teddy, I get to pass it over to you.
So the three most important numbers in a person's life are your social security number, your phone number, and your FICO score. At Zest, we thought it was wrong that a secret algorithm determines lending outcomes for everyone, especially an algorithm that is deeply unfair. Half of all white Americans have a FICO score above 700. 1 in 5 Black people have a FICO score above 700. That is not a reflection of credit risk. That is a reflection of historical racism.
I stop it there, Jeff.
Yeah, that's Teddy Flo from Zest AI, and we can give you the link in the.
I'll put it in the YouTube stream.
Yeah, you might want to listen to it. It actually is a really good panel discussion on some similar stuff that we're talking about today. And they're sort of a vendor that uses sort of alt data to try to figure out credit risk in a different way than using traditional credit scores. But one of the things that I have a real interest in is trying to figure out whether alternative data is actually going to be a really great thing that can give us better outcomes, or whether it's a really terrible thing that's just going to lead us into more bias. Now, Teddy seems to think that it can get rid of bias, and he seems to have some really good data to back that up. Certainly, the current system seems to have a lot of bias in it. But we also know that when you get a lot of AI systems in there, that it's pretty easy to have bias just sort of hidden by the AI. So, and I've also been sort of skeptical of the current banking system and credit scoring systems just adding in new amounts of alternative data and saying, hey, our credit score is now better because we're looking at your social media profiles and your location data and whatever other thing we can scrape and throwing that into our credit scores, right? So I'm not really sure where I land on this stuff yet with alternative data. It could be really terrible, or maybe there's some way to make it good. Teddy seems to think that it can be made good.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you guys think?
I agree with him. And so that's actually, I think what we're going to see is that we have reputation systems that are anchored to particular tasks. So coming actually at this from a totally different angle, as in, if you're doing something, right? So whatever that is in the world, maybe you're playing the guitar really well, or maybe you're a shipper of something, you work at the dockyard, and you're doing this particular task really well. Right now, it's very hard to create a reputation around that particular task, right? That basically doesn't exist, but we need that. And the reason why I say we need this is, I think over the next decade, we're going to see an explosion of kind of this, what we call the gig worker economy, to the extent that you want to be able to provide services to people around the world and with whatever expertise that you're having. But there needs to be a reliable reputation system anchored to that. And so the example I usually use for that is if you look like these larger gig worker sites, right? They have kind of broken down into all these different disciplines, where there's just people that focus on audio engineering, which I'm still bad at, or video engineering, or Photoshop editing, or whatever it is. And you can see based on their particular rating, this particular task that they're doing it really, really well because 1,000 people gave them 5 stars, right? So the point there being is, ultimately, for most things, most interactions for like human cooperation technology, that's really what you need only, right? Because otherwise you would probably never want to buy a license plate because it was made by some criminal in some prison, right? If that's your criteria. But maybe this particular inmate is really, really good at making license plates. Who knows, right? That's probably the worst example I could have used. But I think you get kind of the point.
Yeah. Kim Curry, do you want to introduce yourself? And I don't know if you have any thoughts on alternative data.
Sure. Kim Curry here. Oh, sorry. Did you need my video on as well, or just voice?
You don't have to if you don't want to.
Yeah, no, it's fine either way. I'm fine. I was just wondering if I needed to do something on my end for that. So I thought those were very interesting points about the alternative data. I haven't looked into it enough. That's kind of new for me as far as that. I'd very much like to pursue that, though. I've got thoughts on both sides of that. As a background screener for 25 years, definitely recognize the kind of the crossover between data security, access, and privacy. I think they all can survive together, but having somebody know when I leave and when I come home is something I can't afford for someone to know, because I work with survivors of human trafficking. So like there's just different ideas and thoughts about that, but to the point of being very good at something and 5-star ratings and that helping your reputation profile, so to speak, I think might be a very good thing. So I'd love to reserve comment on that. But I definitely can answer any questions or have thoughts about the consumer reporting agencies as far as pre-employment goes, and processes that are set in place to actually advocate and help consumers, especially if there is bad data out there and mistakes. I work daily with my clients to get rid of that, any data that is incorrect in the dispute process, and especially for my survivor clients to just completely get rid of any expunged records, because the national databases are notorious for having stale, outdated data that they shouldn't have. So I definitely am on that bandwagon and work feverishly to make sure that any data I know about, I'm canvassing all the nationwide providers that I know of and work with, and sending them the expunged orders, soliciting them to immediately remove that from their databases. And then I go back and check and make sure it's truly gone. But the FCRA requires that the local information, the local court and sources of that information be verified before any of that national data is used. So there's also recourse for consumers that if that's not being done, they have civil and federal opportunities to pursue action against anybody that is misusing or abusing or not following the FCRA, because it's very specific and very stringent on that. So I definitely have played on both sides and continue to play on both sides of that coin, you know, being a provider and a CRA, as well as an advocate for the consumer on the other side, helping them to get rid of that stale and inaccurate information.
I have a follow-up question to that. It's my understanding that the credit agency don't collect criminal data or criminal records.
Well, so so my comment, and what's one of the frustrating things for me is that the three main credit bureaus are completely sole and separate from the specialty consumer reporting agencies and the job that we do as a pre-employment screening company. And we get dinged, you know, for what Equifax, TransUnion and Experian are doing. Then that we get lumped into that whole look at all the bad data, we need to shut all this down, when they're not realizing that the pre-employment screening part is actually serving a purpose to protect consumers, protect employers, protect society, excuse me, by doing, I think, very critically needed background checks so that we're ensuring that the public is safe when a plumber shows up at your house, or when you're sitting next to somebody in a cubicle at a call center, or your teacher hasn't been convicted of a sex offense, or, you know, and on and on and on. But 100%, the credit bureaus typically, now I need to throw in a caveat in just a second, but traditionally the three credit bureaus don't report on your criminal data or any of the other information that is procured once a consumer is given a disclosure, signs a written authorization. They know what information is being pulled, and they've given permission to do so. The credit bureaus traditionally don't have that other information that pre-employment agencies do. However, Equifax just purchased some other data providers. They didn't purchase a CRA, but they purchased data providers that provide data, criminal record data to CRAs. So they've become now a provider of more than credit information to the CRAs for background screening. So that kind of muddied the waters, and it's just interesting how all that is shaking out. But traditionally, they're two separate camps, if that helps at all.
It does, and I have a little bit of background knowledge, and for the YouTube viewers, I'm just showing you guys this website so people can get in touch with you there at Vital 4.
Perfect, thank you.
And so as far as I know, and that was a startup that came by here 2 or 3 years ago by our office, I think the way that a lot of these records are being created can be as simple as someone physically walking into a police station, collecting this data, writing it down, and then selling it to someone who is reselling it. And then there's no recourse if where there's an extinction event afterwards, i.e. someone who has been charged is then being released, and that record should be extinct because the record has been created in a particular way, i.e. just hand copied, handed over. Am I representing this and remembering this correctly, and is this still the case today? Can you speak to that?
So there's both. So there are live ways to get data through what they call scraping, or it's real-time data and there's also stale data, right? But there are ways to access the data that's in the courts electronically. There is also, to your point, there is also the availability to walk into a court, pull that information, write it down, and then sell it. However, you're considered, if it all comes down to the use case and the purposes for that information. If that information is being used for employment purposes and you're selling it to a CRA, that's a pre-employment background screening agency, then you also fall under the FCRA as far as a furnisher goes, and there are requirements that you have to follow as well. So where that kind of gets a little muddy is the case between, say, a private investigator versus a consumer reporting agency. A lot of private investigators don't realize that they actually are considered a consumer reporting agency the second they sell their data to a consumer reporting agency that then sells that data for employment purposes. So it really matters what the use case is. The expunged data, as what I believe I was hearing from your question as well, the expunged data, once it's expunged at the source level at that county courthouse, it's no longer available. So no one can walk in and get that information just by running a county search or a county name search. The social security number has nothing to do with the name search background screen. That's a misnomer that's out there, that people think if you run your social security number, you find out all this criminal information. That is not the case. Most criminal records have been redacted of social security numbers. So it's really a name-based search, and you look for name and date of birth are the two most utilized identifiers. After that, then if there are other identifiers contained within the record, then those are used to make a positive identification, but that's not how they're stored. So if somebody walks into a courthouse, gives the name Kim Curry and my date of birth, then they're going to either find a record or find a clear status, and then they can give that information to a CRA. So with the expunged records, then at the state level, most states have also cleared that expunged information. The trouble happens with the national or nationwide databases, like your when you log in on like Truth Finder, or all these random database providers out there, and some of the furnishers that CRAs use, that data sometimes is stored and it's stale because they're not refreshing their data. That's one of the great things about Vital4, who I am now working with. We refresh our data constantly. So I just actually did a comparison between us and one of our competitors as a data provider. An expunged record came back when I did the search in one of my competitors, and then I searched our system and it did not come back. So I was obviously very pleased to see that because for my survivors, I contact all of those database providers and tell them you need to remove this if it's there. And again, I go back and verify. That's what the work I do for my nonprofit. But the data that Vital4 provides, and we do anti-money laundering, we do politically exposed persons. I mean, we provide a whole lot of data out there to help stop crime and stop abuse of information.
Very good. Yeah, for disclosure, a friend of mine is on your board.
Oh, that's awesome. That's very cool. That's a nice parallel then.
No, I was wondering if he sent this to you.
No.
He didn't. It's just coincidence. Yeah, it's a small world.
Yeah, it was actually Jeff contacted me on LinkedIn and said, hey, you should jump on the call tomorrow. And I was like, okay, thank you so much. So that's wonderful. Well, it's very nice to meet you.
Good to meet you, and we'll have you back.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Ruben is back.
Hey, guys. Hey, I had, I don't know if anybody else wanted to comment on that, but one thing that I wanted to sort of go a little bit deeper on is some of the consolidation in the industry. So when I was putting together sort of a list of data brokers, one of the things that I found is that organizations like Equifax and the other big three have actually been gobbling up a lot of companies. And so if you just look at Equifax specifically, right? I don't know how far back this goes, but I found several different organizations that they've sort of, eaten. Like DataX is an alternative data organization. Digital Segment is a multi-channel marketing company. IXI is a multi-dimensional financial and economic insight firm. PayNet, leading provider of credit ratings for small businesses. The Work Number database provides verification services for employers. IntelliReal, real estate analytics and valuations. It's also Austin Consolidated and Compliance Data Center. There's a lot of different companies that they've sort of gobbled up recently, which is, I think, sort of shows you how big these organizations are really getting. Another data point that's interesting is while after the Equifax data breach happened in 2017, they lost 30% of their valuation. I think it actually went down close to 40% at one point, but within a year, it was all the way back up to where it was. And it's fluctuated quite a bit over the past couple of years. But at the end of last year, 2022, they were actually double where they were before the crash. So it's actually had literally no impact on them long term. And if you look at most companies that have had a data breach, if you're a small company, data breaches can kill you. If you're a small business, even a medium-sized business that doesn't handle it well can kill you. But for large organizations, it rarely has any long-term impact. In fact, there is a group of CISOs that were talking about this on a podcast I heard a few months back, and they actually invest in companies that see their stock drop if they're a large enough organization, because they know that those organizations' stock is going to bounce back in a few months. And it's a pretty good investment strategy.
Yeah, we're showing the actual revenue increase on the YouTube stream if you're watching there. So yeah, it's appalling, right? If you think about that business model. I don't know why this business model exists in this particular way.
Well, I'm sorry, I sort of monopolized a couple of last minutes there. We've got a few minutes. Ruben, do you want to say any last words, or Dana? We've had you sitting here for a while. I apologize. I'm not hearing you, Ruben. I think you might be out of luck there, Ruben.
The perils of the live show.
Sorry about that.
We'll ad-lib something that you said very wisely later in post.
All right, you're on, Dana.
Thank you for having me today. I don't really have any other last comments. Otherwise, I might start cursing. So.
Cursing is totally allowed. As I set it to no children allowed for this stream.
Any last thoughts, Kim?
No, just thank you so much for having me. I really appreciated being able to share a little bit about that side of the CRA world.
Jeff, what are we doing next week?
That is a good question, and I should have that at hand, and I don't. What are we doing next week? We're doing rules. How do I get it? We're essentially doing platform rules, like from Google and Facebook, and how they compare to privacy laws. So.
Yeah, that's a good one. Well,
how do platform rules compare to privacy laws for organizations? So if Facebook says you have to have a privacy policy, how does that compare to a state law, for instance, that says you have to have a privacy policy? Because if you can't get your app into the App Store because you have to have a privacy policy, or you can't put your app in the store, that's a pretty interesting conundrum, right?
Yeah.
And if you can't have a cookie because Google won't let you have cookies once they finally turn that shit on, that's pretty interesting, right? I mean, it says you can't track. Maybe you can get around that, but it's an interesting thing, the power of platforms versus legal rules. So we want to discuss that next week.
Yeah. Tech makes laws and regulators make rules. That's the difference.
Right.
Hey,
All right.
while we're here,
I want to thank you.
audio coming through? Nothing?
Yeah, well, we can hear you now, but we are at the top of the hour,
That's
so
a shame.
we'll do
Okay.
the rest.
Go ahead, Ruben.
Yeah.
You got a couple of seconds.
30 seconds. Okay, TLDR. I think a lot of the means of machination that centralized interests, whether it be state or commercial, are leveraging for individual benefit to the detriment of the equities of the aggregate, are neutral and can be leveraged the other way. Things like automating arbitration filings, things like automating right to know requests, things like using the technology to hide individual data rather than sort of reveal it by de facto. All sorts of things that could be automatable if somebody just builds those products.
That's right.
Yeah. I also wanted to point out to an individual in the questions here, could you send me a list of the data brokers? I would encourage you to take a look at the State of Vermont Data Broker Registry, which is like a few hundred of them at least. Yeah, so State of Vermont Data Broker Registry, that's a useful one. And yeah, looking forward to perhaps exploring some of these conversations into the future, perhaps.
Jeff, how many do we have in our database now?
I've got close to 2,000.
Oh my goodness.
And Kim, I will send you some stuff. I'll contact you at least, all right?
All right. Have a good weekend, everybody. Tune in next week.
Yep. This has been Your Bytes, Your Rights. Take care, everybody.